Can I have your attention? We're going to get started here in just a minute. I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping events before we turn it over to the consultants. Thank you. My name is Leslie Johnson. I'm with the City of Red Bank. We have Michael Fan here, who's also with the City of Red Bank. A couple of housekeeping things. Restrooms are behind the wall, behind the screen. Please feel free to come up and do what we need to do. We have water. We have popcorn. Your exits are in the area around you. We are also live streaming, so this will be recorded for follow-up on our YouTube page. So just giving you some information to know that it's being recorded live and streaming, so we will have a recording. Thank you so much for being here. This is truly the beginning of Red Bank's future. We see it as a canvas, and it's an opportunity for the public to participate as much as possible to see how we're going to move forward for the next generation of young. Thank you again for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Adam. He is with TSW, our consultant, and we're going to get things started tonight.
Thank you. Adam Williamson with TSW. We're excited to be here. It's a great turnout, so I appreciate everyone coming out. Beautiful view out here on a beautiful day, so we're excited to work with you guys in the community. So this is the comprehensive plan and small area plan that we're looking at. And let's see if I can get these slides to move. So here's our agenda. We're going to go over existing conditions, and we'll go over those in fairly detail, so I won't repeat those. And we'll talk about the key findings from the existing conditions. And then we're going to have an opportunity to go back through the engagement activities if you haven't done that yet. So an overview, I wanted to do team introductions. So we're working for the City of Red Bank. Again, I'm Adam Williamson with TSW, and what we'll be looking at is land use, transportation, mobility, and that will be done. Bert will handle the transportation, and Allison and Beverly and Roxanne here will be looking at land use, open space, and the small area plan. And then we have one more consultant, JS&A, and that's Leslie Gray here. And she will be looking at the economic development, helping us with the small area plan. So what this plan will address, again, we'll be looking at existing conditions, and we're going to cover all that very thoroughly in a moment. And the most important piece is the community input from you guys. Really, this is your plan. We want to get the input from you guys, and you guys will drop the plan, and we'll put it together. And we'll be looking at existing conditions analysis. And then we'll provide recommendations. And then we also will be looking at the Red Bank Middle School site and doing a small area study. And you'll see back here some opportunities to get input on that also. Our project timeline, we started in January. We were out at the Christmas parade getting a little bit of public involvement. This is our second meeting. We finished the existing conditions, and we're going to really start working on the recommendations the next few months through the summer, and come back out for more community engagement, start the small area plan also. And then we're going to try to finish the project up in December for the first of the year. So I'm going to turn it over to Leslie to talk about demographics.
Hi there, thanks for joining us. So I'm going to just admit from the get-go, I'm a little bit of a data nerd. I don't know if we have other data nerds in the room. Okay, if your hand is up, you probably want to find one of the printouts because there's a lot of data in that. And I got a little carried away in some of this documentation. So what I'm going to do is just walk through this very quickly and share some of the high-level findings of what we've been looking at when we're looking at our demographic analysis and our other analyses for as part of the existing conditions. Again, that high level, take a look at Red Bank. When we look at population change over time, which is kind of the founding base of a lot of comp plans, what we see here is a very stabilized line, right? So not a lot of population growth, some population undulations, as I'd like to say, but a pretty consistent population size in the community since 1990. However, that doesn't mean that the population has stayed exactly the same. So as we've dug through a bunch of data, we found that almost 20% of Red Bankers have moved into Red Bank in the past year, in 2022. That's a little bit higher than what we would expect in other communities similar to Red Bank. We usually look around that 10% mark. So a good influx of new people. They're coming from elsewhere in Hamilton County. Even 6% are coming from another state and making Red Bank their first home in Tennessee. So a lot of mobility within that, stagnant population line. With that comes changes, of course. When we look at some population changes that we've seen, a growing age cohort from 25 to 45-year-olds are coming into Red Bank. A little bit of a decline in some children, but again, that 25 to 34 is usually a good indicator that maybe there's more children on their way in the future. And also a little bit of an aging community too, where we're seeing some upticks in residents between 55 and 74. Yeah, so good representation today. I like the enthusiasm, upping the ante on my data. Similarly, when we look at education changes, educational attainment for populations, we look at folks over 25. Between 2010 and 2022, those with bachelor's and advanced degrees have more than doubled in Red Bank. So with that increase in education, we see higher salaries potentially. We see more of a share of folks with bachelor's or advanced degrees in Red Bank than elsewhere in Hamilton County and Chattanooga. Overall, we are looking at a community that's predominantly middle class, but it's really on par with the area when we look at Red Bank compared to Chattanooga, compared to Hamilton County. Very consistent rates. Again, household incomes that are on par with the region, what we would expect to see. A slightly lower amount of folks in that 150 plus income bracket. That's what we like to flag for taking a look at in the future. So in 10 years, is that going to be different? Kind of a metric to keep an eye on. But with all this change comes opportunity, and some great opportunity for Red Bank to be in control of what's to come in the future. Even though we're looking at that population that's remained overall as a population cohort, pretty stagnant, that flat line, there is opportunity to capture more growth if Red Bank's interested. Hamilton County is growing more. Red Bank can be in a little bit more of a driver's seat of capturing that growth and really at a kind of fork in the road of thinking through, do we want to have some minimal growth in the future? So we want to capture a higher share, increase the population of Red Bank, bring in new folks. A really big part of the comprehensive planning process that we'll be talking through over the coming months. How did I do on the data? Pretty quick? Not too boring yet?
We're going to switch over from data to some maps. So if anyone likes geography, we're going to be in a good place. But land use basically talks about how we use the land. And what really is the foundation of that is zoning and how you legally dictate where things can go. So you can see most of Red Bank's land, over half of it is zoned for residential, and of that, most of that is single family residential. So those are typically houses that stand by themselves. And then you see that very strong corridor along Dayton Boulevard in red, that's the commercial district. And then we look at what the existing land use is, so how everything is right now, you see that it really mirrors that pattern that the legal basis the zoning has laid out. So that kind of indicates that the way that the city's operating, the way that it's processing applications is in line with that past vision and that current book. Sometimes you can see a deviation, but overall it's pretty on par with each other. A lot of that's supported by this very, very important infrastructure. The sewer infrastructure really dictates the growth and the change and what gets developed. And you can see that sewer infrastructure is pretty much covering the entire city. There are pockets on the periphery that don't have it, but a lot of that also has to do with the kind of very drastic topographic changes that we'll talk about later that can make it really difficult to build that infrastructure. There are projects on the way, kind of hinting at what that future growth may look like. A lot of that housing, again, is in line with that existing pattern. You see the single family growth. There is some mixed use, which hasn't really been introduced into the city before, coming on the way at that Save a Lot site that we have here. You can kind of see in the lower quadrant the star. I know that that's not as yellow on this as it is on your handout if you got one, but could cause another point of consideration as the city continues to grow. Do you want to integrate some of those land uses more that can lead to better walkability, that can lead to more foot traffic to support that really important commercial corridor along Dayton? So another thing to be looking at and something we're going to consider heavily as we go into the next stage of the plan. I'll turn it over to Bert.
So looking at transportation and mobility, kind of laying the foundation of what, what's in the city, what is the existing mobility structure and network. Like most cities, most of the streets are the local streets. What's really unique about Red Bank, obviously, is this spine, Dayton Boulevard, that runs through the city. Not most of the neighborhoods connect to it, but they may not be that connected with it from a pedestrian perspective. Looking at traffic capacity, average daily traffic, these are numbers from TDOT. Pretty good capacity on existing streets. Of course, most of the traffic was diverted to 27. But as you know, there are backups on Ashland Terrace. So a lot of people coming through east-west. Unfortunately, those streets don't align. They don't come together. So you've got that weird gap there between. There's a lot of weird traffic stuff happening there, and there are a lot of crashes happening there as well. Average of 264 crashes in between those intersections. Morrison Springs and Ashland Terrace on Dayton Boulevard, but also a lot down at Signal Mountain Road and Dayton Boulevard. A lot of traffic there too, but also a lot of fast-moving operations happening there with vehicles. And also pedestrian crashes, and those are indicated in the map as well. So the pedestrian network, obviously there are sidewalks on the spine on Dayton Boulevard, but if you've walked it, I'm sure most of y'all have, it may not be the most pleasing pedestrian experience because it's typically a sidewalk right next to the traffic and it's going pretty fast typically. And of course it jumps from one side of the road to the other. And there are a good bit of gaps, but really not a lot of penetration into the neighborhoods with the sidewalks. And a lot of challenge there too, because it's a lot of roadside ditch instead of curb and gutter. So that's kind of the framework, but also looking at locations of crosswalks. So bike ped demand, Strava, a lot of folks here probably use Strava. And you can actually look at their heat map. So people that use Strava, your routes go into here. It's anonymous, of course. But we kind of know where people are running, walking, riding bikes. A lot of heat down there at Stringer's Ridge. A lot of people biking on Dayton Boulevard on the major streets. A lot of walking happening on the neighborhood streets. The neighborhood streets are really great. And that kind of goes into the current and future projects. The bike boulevard that the city's pursuing, that the city got a CMAQ grant for to really enhance what's essentially a bike route now and turn it into a bike boulevard, which is doing things like traffic calming, wayfinding, branding to make this an official walking, biking corridor. They're also called neighborhood greenways, slow streets, neighborways. So that's a great thing there. There are some gaps there that we're going to be looking at, but also some safety studies at key intersections, and the bridge replacement is in the regional transportation plan. So we like to focus on what are the key walkability areas, obviously focusing around schools is what we typically do at schools and parks, but also at centers like neighborhood centers, town centers. So like there's the downtown area there in the middle. You've got areas to the south that are either historically developed as walkable town centers or kind of evolving that way already, but also potential in the north at kind of those former big box stores. So really focusing on those areas, but also focusing on Dayton Boulevard itself. So the really huge benefit of being a primary corridor, one corridor town, is that if Dayton Boulevard can become a walkable, safe corridor, that could transform the entire city. So huge opportunity there to become a complete street. And the city is really aggressively pursuing that. And that really starts with a complete streets policy. That's something that the city's working on. They've got a draft complete streets policy. And so we're trying to feed into that as much as possible as well.
So some more charts and graphs for you all. Roxanne mentioned housing playing a big part of your land use fabric. We've got a couple of insights on this. Unsurprisingly, about 65% of your houses are single family detached, but that's not the only story here. We do have a good amount of diversity in the housing options here, although be it lower. What we will be talking about in a few slides from now is this concept of the missing middle housing, which often refers to those units or those structures that are between 2 units up to those 10 or 19. This core in here where you don't see as many duplexes, triplexes, quads being built as was built in the 70s or the 80s or even earlier. You see those larger apartment buildings. It's a really important concept in urban planning and will be part of the conversation. So this missing middle, when we hear missing middle coming up, we're again talking about that 2 to 19 or so units. This chart overall too, and I left out a chart to save you guys some brain calories, but these years are pretty similar overall to the county. Okay, so right on par. The housing stock being built predominantly between 1950 and 1980. So some aging housing. About 80% of all of your homes was built before 1980. You have seen some new development, but again, pretty limited in comparison to the overall housing stock. What that means is you might have some aging homes, some uptick in housing development to come in the future. And I've got some data here that's a little bit old. It's from 2021, so it's not capturing all the dynamic market forces in the housing market that's gone on in the past couple of years. But about 2/3 of your homes are valued between $200,000 and $400,000. Again, we know with some data limitations, it's probably up a little bit too if you've been following the housing market and those escalating costs. In terms of how Red Bank compares to the county overall, slightly lower. Your median home value here is about $240,000 compared to about $280,000 in the county. That's a good sign for affordability. That helps explain the desirability for Red Bank residents moving in. When we look at rents, rents are slightly less than Hamilton County overall, probably attributable to some of the older apartment buildings. In competition with some of the new development that's been elsewhere in the county. When we look at the housing stock, it's not always important to just look at the structures and the units themselves, but also the folks inside. In Red Bank, about 2/3 of all of the residents are owners and about a little bit more than 1/3 are renters. That's a pretty healthy mix. A little bit more owners than Chattanooga, little more renters than Hamilton County overall, kind of on par with what we would expect to see in this size and scale of a community and pretty similar rates. You do have slightly smaller household size, so that 2.0, miraculous 0.0 figure, always believable, slightly smaller than the county overall. That hits closer to that 2.5 again when we think about that growing age cohort of the 25 to 35-year-olds. Maybe in 10 years, that 2.0 is a 2.1 or 2.2. Okay, wanted to hit on a few notes in terms of economic development. So we've got land use covered, transportation covered, demographics covered. Let's talk about your businesses and your economy. In Red Bank, we got about 335 businesses, predominantly in the service-oriented, retail, construction, and healthcare industries. A lot of those businesses serving local neighborhood needs. You see those dentists, you see those construction, you have those retailers to meet your needs day to day. While you have 335 businesses, you got about 2,200 people working in Red Bank. So a population of about 12,000, about 22,000 people working here. Top sectors are in the administration and support, food services and retail, as well as your additional service industry like your automobiles, dry cleaners, things of that nature, those neighborhood serving industries. Top employers, Hamilton County Schools, City of Red Bank, Erlanger North Hospital, Food City, and Red Bank Baptist Church. We talked about that, about 2,200 people, some different data sources linger a little bit lower, like the chart that I have on here, if anyone's paying really close attention to the numbers. We got about 2,200 people coming into work. about 5,500 people leaving to go work elsewhere, so leaving out of Red Bank. Not surprising, of course, being in your position next to Chattanooga, you would expect that inflow, outflow. But what we find really interesting is what's happening here in the middle. I don't know if anyone can see this cursor that I keep using. That's about the size of a penny. We have about 150 people whose primary jobs are in Red Bank, and they also live and work in Red Bank. So again, a pretty low number of people that are living and working, and a trigger there maybe is an opportunity to get more Red Bank residents working in Red Bank or starting a business in Red Bank. I will give the caveat that, remote work and hybrid work trends are on the uprise. This isn't quite capturing that, of course. So while their primary jobs might be elsewhere, they might be in the community. What we like to think of in economic development is when folks have their jobs in your community, that's bringing in what we call daytime population. So they're supporting your businesses so that if you're leaving to go work elsewhere, when you come back, you got a business to shop at, to go out for a drink at, to dine at. Having a stronger daytime population, having more workers in your community during the day, throughout all times of the day, helps support more local businesses. So I'm not from the Tennessee area. I'm from Washington, D.C. I do work across the country, and anytime I look at average commute times, I'm very envious. About 70% of Red Bank residents commute less than, or commute between 10 and 25 minutes. And even about 10% are commuting less than 10 minutes. So even though you're leaving the city to go work elsewhere, you're not going too far. A lot of benefits to that, of course. I would say better quality of life as someone who commutes 45 minutes, helps also attract people to have more flexible ways of commuting. So when Bert talks about bike paths, when we talk about complete streets, when you get in those really small commute times, hey, there's maybe more ways to get to your job. And then maybe on my nerdiest slide of the day is some unemployment rates and labor force participation rates. So what we did here is take a look at how Red Bank compares to Chattanooga to say, okay, how's unemployment? How is labor force participation? And the answer is it's very healthy. So you have lower unemployment rates. More people are employed here than in Chattanooga, which is great. And very high labor force participation rates. So more people are participating in the workforce than elsewhere in Chattanooga. We like to say that the 25 to 54-year-olds are that prime age workforce cohort. I think my parents would disagree with me on that, but very, very high labor participation for that prime age cohort and very low unemployment rates. We do see a little bit of an uptick in that 55 to 64-year-olds, but guess what? That's the age cohort that's transitioning into retirement. And that our speculation is that's more tied into that transitionary period of employment within that period. Again, really great economy in terms of having those businesses here, having a good amount of employees coming into work in your community, opportunity to maybe capture higher shares of people to live and work in Red Bank, but again, a very healthy labor force participation, a lot of active jobs here.
All right, last but not least, I'm going to cover parks, open space, and the environment. So parks and open space and green space is a very important aspect of a healthy and vibrant community. I'm sure all of y'all know that. There is a separate ongoing study right now that's being held and hosted by a separate consultant, that is the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. And so this started late 2023 and it's wrapping up later this year. A lot of you may have seen a survey for that. So they've just gotten a lot of those survey results and are processing it, working on programs. What they're doing is they're looking at the existing parks and areas for new parks. As a part of this comp plan, merging all the elements that you've already seen and heard today is the parks and open space. So we'll be collaborating with that group and bringing in their information. And that'll also help us kind of think about the future of land use and connectivity of how we're providing clear access and what's being developed in the future around those parks. So hydrology, as Bert and other people have talked about, Dayton Boulevard, is really that main spine that runs up and down of Red Bank. Another really interesting part of Dayton Boulevard is Stringer's Branch, which also follows that. And it provides that's the main commercial corridor, but it also has this flood zone running along it too. So that's something that we'll be studying as we're thinking about land use of how are we interacting with the creek. And one thing that's really interesting about it is that with the topography, that really is Red Bank stream. Our watershed is going into that stream, and the city is also working with Hamilton County to develop ways to improve the ecology of that. They were recently just won a $250,000 state grant to do restoration of that. And this is again another consultant, but a project that's happening just over in the park area. So as I just mentioned, another thing is we're thinking about land use that's very impactful in terms of what types of development can be impacted by is topography. So some very steep slopes kind of coming on both edges. And so that can constrain what types of land use happens in Red Bank and where things can be built. And so there's also, the city has updated its steep slopes ordinance to help moderate that and make sure things are well built. But this is, again, all these things start to layer on when we're starting to think about that future land use and connectivity. And here, again, with the topography or slopes. So here you can see there's a lot of areas that have the greater than 25% incline. And that steep slopes ordinance, that starts to moderate and make guidelines for that 20% slope. So to wrap all of this up, again, comp plans, we're looking at all of these aspects. We try and take a very holistic approach to study all of this, and we're taking these existing conditions and then overlaying it of what we hear from y'all, from the community, to develop this path forward. So the comp plans, we're looking at 20 years in advance. It's a long-term study. We're going to make recommendations of how to implement that with specific projects. But since we're starting out at the beginning right now, it's really we're looking to y'all to help give us direction on what does that future potential growth look like and what do you want to see for Red Bank. So as Leslie was mentioned, there are like two routes. We can stay stable, or we can start to implement some strategies to help promote growth. And then also looking at diversifying and expanding that aging single family housing stock, and then providing updates to the land use plan and zoning ordinance that might allow things, for example, that allow more ADUs or things to promote affordable housing and concentrating development in areas that make sense and that the community wants to see. And then, as I mentioned, whatever we're doing, we're going to make sure that it's careful consideration of the hydrology and topography and steep slopes. And then supplementing that strong roadway network of Dayton, but also thinking about the neighborhoods in terms of pedestrian and bicyclist safety and connectivity. So what's next? So tonight we have a lot of different activities. Again, we're at the very beginning of this. And so we're really collecting as much information as we can. And we have a few that are specific to the comp plan, which is more thinking, higher level, and then a few that are more specific to the small area study for the former Red Bank Middle School site. We'll have an online public survey coming up in the next couple weeks we'll take some of the information that we've heard tonight and then come up with maybe some more idea of what more information we need. And then we've been doing stakeholder interviews throughout this process. We'll keep doing those. And then after this, we're going to take all this information, take the information from the survey, and we're going to come up with 2 different scenarios for the former Red Bank Middle School site. And then we'll be at the May Jubilee, and that way we'll present 2 different concepts and give another chance to collect a lot of feedback before we're honing in on one site designed for the former Red Bank Middle School site. So I know a lot of y'all have already started some of the activities. We have let's see, where to go? Right there, the big stand. We have different key cards that you can write on what makes Red Bank special, what will be Red Bank's biggest challenge for the next 10 years, if I could change one thing about Red Bank, and what is your big idea for the future of Red Bank. So those those questions will help us get a broad overview of the goals that we might be setting for the comprehensive plan and figure out where the strengths and opportunities and threats are for Red Bank. And then on this side, this is almost all for the small area study. So we're looking at a few different land use scenarios that I'll cover in a second. And then also these visual preference boards. So you can grab a sticker, and we've got things on land use, residential scale, mixed use height, retail and civic use types, public space amenities, recreation amenities, and creative placemaking elements. So again, this will help us figure out what do you want to see on that side and how can we start to mix that together into two different concepts. And then in the back as well, we have a couple different, and these are just very preliminary studies to figure out, again, looking at different combinations of land use, different acreages. So this site, the former Red Bank Middle School site, is in the Central Business District. So for these initial studies, we've shown a mix. We've shown some commercial in some of them. We've shown the green space at a variety of different scales. And then we've shown the mixed use, which has the ground floor of retail and then residential above and then missing middle. So that is a little bit of what Leslie was saying. And we've already done, a good amount of stakeholder interviews. And one of the biggest things we've heard through some of those is that affordable housing is a big piece of Red Bank and finding more opportunities for that. So this missing middle, that does provide an opportunity for it. And each of these is kind of a varied scale of how much long-term investment the city will be making. So this goes from scenario A, which is a low long-term city investment, because that means you've got the commercial and mixed use starting to offset some of that, the tax base and getting some revenue from it to help offset some of that cost that the city will be putting into the green space. And then kind of to the far end of where this third scenario is, where you've got a civic use and which would, be city funded as well, green space, and then kind of more of that higher end of the city investment. So it's a lot to think about and a lot to think about kind of long-term, where do you want to put your investment? And here are some comparable park sizes. So we've got Miller Park and Miller Plaza at like 1.5 acres, Kids Corner at 2.5, Jefferson Park at 3.5, and then Coolidge at 12. All right, and that concludes our presentation, but we want to give everybody plenty of time to do the activities, so you can kind of go ahead and start doing activities, and if you have specific questions, you're welcome to come up to us and grab us and ask us anything you'd like. We'll try to answer it.